Amwell, July 26, 1952. Self-love. It is little use being on this disciplinary planet, resenting everything. Like other negative states, resentment makes bad chemistry. A negative psychology fitted onto a healthy body poisons it. Here you have at least to remember two things. The first is that your being attracts your life. In short, there is something wrong with the way you take things. The other is that since creation comes from the interaction of three forces, a trinity composed of active, passive and neutralizing powers, there will always be a passive, second or resisting force to oppose you in the very nature of things. It is not just someone else's fault. Also, it is useless personifying second force as the devil. These two factors, one inside, the other outside, we ignore. We don't really listen. Our self-love is death. We prefer to take things personally. At the Institute, although we were told that personality had scarcely any right to exist there, no one grasped quite what it meant. I fancy we did not even know we had personalities to separate from. It takes so long to see. I did not realize that one meaning of this remark was that I must not take everything personally. If I had known and practiced absence from resentment instead of a sort of tolerant, weary, British patience, concealing my resentments, I would have understood some practical things earlier. Instead I made a point of shaving, however unearthly the hour we had to be up at, because, of course, one had to keep up appearances. I was not separating myself from personality, but the reverse. That is the worst of ideals. I was following pictures. Putting the matter in another way, I was following my self-love, not diminishing it. Moreover, at that time I was seeking the work mainly from self-love, expecting to become a magician with supernormal powers. Now I am not speaking of resentment that one does not show, but of the practice of absence from resentment, which is another matter. Politely concealing resentment does not change the underlying love of self. The practice of absence from resentment does. The work, with all its teachings, ideas and diagrams, seeks to transform the self-love. It is not enough to love oneself. One has got to love the work also. What on earth is this self-love? What is it like? How does it act? It is indeed difficult to grasp that as mechanical men and women we are based upon it. Let us try to find illustrations, approximations and definitions. We can say of it that it has endless disguises. It is a wolf in many sheep's clothing. In itself it resents injury. It hates being laughed at. It cannot laugh at itself. It would like every event to reflect merit on itself and everyone to admire it, and if possible bow down to it. In the latter case it disguises itself as extreme modesty and is very humble. But if stuck by something overheard it speaks with a voice like a wasp in a treacle jar. It is at bottom quite callous, save to those who enhance its merit. To these it may disguise itself as kindness, which becomes hard-faced if a criticism or mistake is made. One may be assured that whatever the self-love does it has its own interests in view, however you exclaim you cannot believe it. Public buildings, munificent gifts, free libraries, benefit others, but enhance the donor's repute, which is the real object. What the motive appears to be, and what it is not the same just as it is with each of us. We should know all this in ourselves. One writer speaks of the self-love in these words: what is more restless at heart, more easily provoked, more violently enraged, than the love of self? And it is as often as it is not honored according to the vanity of its heart, or when anything does not succeed, according to its pleasure and desire. Now no one can see his self-love directly. It is only possible to see the results of it. Resentment, restlessness, being very easily provoked or violently enraged, are results that one can perchance observe. One prefers not to, or rather, the self-love will not permit it. Again, all negative emotions are results of self-love, injured or dissatisfied. You know, all negative emotions led down to violence to the prehistoric man, the prehistoric woman. What we want lies on the other side of all that. Now some transformation of the love of self would mean some release from violence, and so something of a new will that is not self-will. Will springs from what we love. Self-love and self-will are twin. I described in a recent commentary a man with a new will whom I met beyond the gulf of prehistoric bones, beyond violence. He showed no resentment. His self-love must have been transformed perhaps into love of God, amor propre, into emeride or love of neighbor. But you can't have the latter without the former, it so happens. In any case, the point is that the basis of self-love makes us all unhappy. We all have this basis, and it is useless looking down on another and saying thank God I have no self-love like that, for it is simply your self-love speaking once more in a thin disguise. Self-love, self-will, self-righteousness such as I keep all the commandments, these three make an ugly trio. Another kind of righteousness altogether is spoken of in the Gospels and in the work. It has nothing to do with the righteousness of the false personality, with meritoriousness, with reputation, with outward appearances, with audience, which have all to do with the love of self. Do you yet realize that you may do good and speak truth and practice sincerity and behave justly, all from the love of self, and all for the sake of reputation, appearance, honor or gain, and in yourself will nothing good and think absolutely nothing of truth? It is the person in yourself that the work seeks to change. This concealed inner man or woman is the subject for transformation, so that if all social and police fears and all external restraints were removed, it would not rush into every sort of evil that comes out of the self-love. Now life education is, or should be, an education of the self-love. One gets prizes. What else is there for schoolmasters to work on? It is both desirable and necessary. It is preferable to be among people who have an educated self-love than among doers. But, speaking paradoxically, although it is desirable and necessary, it stands in the way of the work. The work may find no point of entry and the inner perception of its truth may never be experienced. Given force from another, it may enter the person, but the underlying self-love will keep on casting it out and the deputy steward will scarcely be formed. The deputy steward opposes the self-love. The steward himself makes war on it. Now one way to attack the self-love is through self-observation. One or two of the stupid inventions of the self-love about oneself may be noticed. They may be brought gradually into the light of consciousness. Self-observation lets in light. Light illumines ridiculousness. One laughs at oneself, and thus begins to injure one's own self-love. It shows a considerable step forward to be able to laugh sincerely at part of one's self-love. What is conscious, that is, the light meets what was operating unconsciously, in the darkness. The white and black meet, in however small a way at first. But each time it happens thus, self-love is diminished, and consciousness increases at its expense. It is wonderful to catch a glimpse of your self-love and be able to laugh at it. One loses the former highly explosive oversensitive feeling of I more and more. That means more balance. That means becoming softer. You may, by observing one clear aspect of your self-love over a long period, be given a full-sized photograph of it as it has run through your time body. But we have spoken of all that already. One word more. The untransformed self-love, as I indicated, prevents change in the level of being. In one of the epistles Paul speaks of the difficulty he has with people in his groups who do not really care for what he is teaching in itself, but come for other reasons. He says they all seek their own fill. In 21. In another place, I him. In year 7, where he is speaking openly of lovers of self, he says they are ever learning and never able to come to the knowledge of truth. He means that having only self-love and no love for his teaching, they cannot raise their level enough to perceive internally the truth of what he taught, and know it for themselves. Note: the subject of self-love is so immense that only a few sides of it are mentioned in this paper. All life is based on self-love. Everywhere people are seeking to gratify their self-love in one way or another, or seeking revenge for what they imagine are injuries against their self-love. One or two things can be mentioned. One of the great dangers that threaten humanity is organized self-love. This is done by giving people a certain ideal and drilling the young in it, but I am not going to speak of that any further. You can think about it for yourselves. Do you agree that the following is a simple universal illustration of self-love? Smith despises Brown, and laughs at him. Brown despises Smith and laughs at him. But Smith cannot laugh at Smith, nor can Brown laugh at Brown. That is the trouble with us all. That is why the work tells us to separate from personality. I have